Parents handed business to Golden Sister, but I exposed her fraud and took over while she faces law. My name is Ethan. I'm 26, and my life has always felt like a show where I play the backup character. Then there's Vanessa, my 29-year-old older sister, the star of the family. She's what you'd call a golden girl, but not in the perfect, untouchable way. More like the shine of cheap jewelry that'll start peeling soon. Everyone loves her. Parents, friends, even random strangers on the street look at her as if she's an angel walking among them. But to me, she's always been the embodiment of how not to be. Growing up, Vanessa shone, and I was constantly in the shadow of her so-called perfection. As a kid, I'd get placed next to her, with comments like, "Look at your sister, Ethan. That's what success looks like." Or, "Watch how Vanessa behaves. You could learn something." Great advice, except Vanessa was always playing a role. On the outside, she was all sweetness, virtue, and charm. But I knew the truth. My successful sister was a master manipulator, and probably a fraud who somehow always got away with it. And the worst part? Every time I hinted at this, my parents looked at me like I was the crazy one. One evening, I accidentally overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I walked in, and my parents, thinking I wasn't around, started talking about how they were going to hand the family business over to Vanessa. I stood there, listening in disbelief. Vanessa? With the business? That was news to me. "We believe she'll handle it well," they said. Did anyone ask me? Or am I just some spare part? With each sentence, I felt resentment welling up. I couldn't believe it. They were giving the business, something I had just as much right to inherit, away to her, like I was a nobody who hadn't worked hard for at least a bit of respect. It was in that moment I realized this wasn't just another scene in my supporting role. This was the start of a change that had been a long time coming. All right, let's play big, I decided, realizing that if I wanted something, I'd have to take it myself. Vanessa took to running the family business like a duck to water. She strutted into the office as if she'd already been awarded Business Star of the Year. I remember her first meeting, standing at the head of the table with that overconfident smile that could make steel groan. "Okay, folks," she began. "We're making some changes. Big changes." And after those words, she barely felt the need to explain further. In her mind, she was the unquestionable picture of success. Her first move? Layoffs. She fired a handful of employees who'd been with the company longer than she'd been alive. "They don't get my vision," she explained dismissively when I tried to find out what was going on. My golden sister had decided the company needed new blood. Hers, and only hers. Naturally, she turned everyone against her. But she didn't seem to care. In her eyes, she was a business genius, and everyone else were mere background extras. Now she was surrounded by new friends who couldn't have cared less about the company, but excelled at flattery. These so-called friends from high society dropped by the office, pretending to be experts, although their ideas barely amounted to first-year business school material. But she listened to them, as if each piece of advice was the key to success. And the sad part? People around her seemed to buy into this genius image. Or maybe they were just too scared to say otherwise. As for me, I watched this charade from the sidelines, like an unwilling spectator with a ticket he didn't want. I was left out of all important decisions, handed nothing but frustration and resentment. It was as though my family had chosen to stand by perfect Vanessa, leaving no room for alternative opinions. Every achievement of hers, every round of applause, each felt like a betrayal against me. Truthfully, as I watched her play at being a business shark, I couldn't have felt more out of place. But then, I started noticing something peculiar. Orders that used to come in a month in advance suddenly dried up. A few major clients stopped returning calls. Then the reports. Red numbers everywhere, like blood on white paper. Profits were plummeting, and nobody knew why. My mind started to paint an ugly picture. Vanessa's approach wasn't just bad management, it was a catastrophe waiting to happen. One night, I happened to see her out celebrating with those friends at an expensive restaurant, naturally on the company's dime. Of course, I hadn't been invited. Not that I would have gone, but the point was, she was blowing through company funds like they'd never run out. The smug look on her face told me everything. This wasn't just poor management. It was something far worse, a vanity project masquerading as business. When I finally decided to dig deeper, I knew I had to go all in. Waiting for the business to sink entirely due to Vanessa's antics was no longer an option. So, I began my little mission, exposing my sister. With a few connections and a bit of persuasive charm, I got access to the financial records. Honestly, at that point, I still hoped I was wrong. That maybe all those suspicious transactions and accounts were just a misunderstanding. Yeah, right. As I flipped through the reports, oh boy, it was a circus. Inflated invoices for services that didn't exist. I found IT support invoices in the thousands. IT support? I knew tech people loved when their work was called that, but this wasn't even going to some IT whiz. It was to a pool repair company. Yes, you read that right. These IT specialists apparently showed up with swim rings and pool noodles, and that was just the beginning. I uncovered a series of transfers supposedly for partnership agreements. Yet these partners weren't listed on any of our contracts. Money was funneled to anonymous accounts with amounts that could buy a nice house in sunny California. All right, maybe she's secretly building a spy headquarters? But when I saw the funds going to a personal account under a fake name, all my last doubts evaporated. My lovely sister had turned out to be a financial mastermind, just in the wrong way. She wasn't just abusing the family's trust, she was robbing us blind. And she kept my parents blissfully unaware, assuring them it was all about business expansion and new investments. I slammed the report shut so hard it nearly tore in two. My heart pounded. Okay, Ethan, breathe in, breathe out. I could have stormed into her office right then and exposed the whole thing. But what good would that do? She'd talk her way out of it like always, and my parents would probably just tell me I didn't understand her complex personality. So, I took a seat and started gathering evidence like a detective. I made copies of all the suspicious accounts, marked all the coincidental transfers. I even opened a few dummy emails to forward her corporate messages, just in case something juicy came up. I was ready for anything to complete this mission. This time, she wouldn't wriggle free. After diving deep into Vanessa's financial shenanigans, I knew it was time to step things up. I began calling up people who had once worked in the company before Vanessa showed them the door. Old employees who knew the company inside and out, as well as a few former clients who vanished right after Vanessa took charge. Everyone, from longtime managers to disgruntled customers, was willing to talk. Hey, remember Vanessa? How'd you like her management style? I asked one of the former managers. Oh yeah, Vanessa was a gift. Tried to act like a businesswoman, but was just a shark in a skirt. She basically told us, adapt or leave, he said with a bitter laugh. Another client who left after Vanessa's reforms shared his experience. She jacked up our rates, and when we refused, she flat out told us, there's no place for weakness in this business. Real professional negotiation skills, right? Every story, every email about her threats and intimidation only fueled my motivation further. She was turning our business into some kind of gangster operation, with intimidation and coercion as her tools. And this was her idea of professionalism? With each new account, I realized this wasn't just a struggle over my place in the company. She was tearing down something we had all worked so hard to build. So, I got serious about gathering all this evidence. I created separate files for each victim of her management style and documented every detail they shared with me. All her management strategies, the threats, pressure, and even bribes were now laid out in meticulous detail. And you know what? For the first time, I felt the kind of drive that would take me all the way. I compiled a report that I could submit directly to the authorities. The adrenaline consumed me. This wasn't just a case of a hostile takeover. It was payback. Payback for all the years I spent in her golden shadow. And I knew that once the truth came to light, she'd be forced to account for every dollar, every humiliation, every lie. I was ready to go all in. With a mountain of evidence in hand, I decided it was time to have a serious talk with my parents. Maybe they just don't know that their golden daughter is dancing on the edge of the law, I thought, setting off for home with a mixture of anger and naive hope. Sitting in the kitchen, I waited. My mom walked in, and as always, she wore that familiar smile, the one that said Vanessa was her $1,000,000 dream come true. I started out gently, telling them how suspicious transactions were popping up in the company. Clients were leaving, profits were dropping. You know, all the real-world facts that should have been a wake-up call. But based on their expressions, I might as well have been talking about some fantasy world. They exchanged glances, and my mom nodded sympathetically, though I could tell she thought I was blowing things out of proportion. Then, of course, she hit me with her favorite line. "Ethan, you know Vanessa is just very ambitious. You've never understood her drive. She's just trying so hard." Her look implied that I should simply be grateful for getting to exist in her radiant presence. Ambitious? I nearly spat out the word. Mom, her ambitions are Titanic-sized, and like the Titanic, she's dragging us all down with her. Dad, of course, chimed in with his unique take. "Ethan, you're just jealous. She's finally making something out of this company. Don't be afraid of progress, and honestly, you just don't understand. It's complicated business." Oh, that set me off. Complicated business? I repeated, looking at them with such intensity it almost scared me. She's stealing, blackmailing, and bribing. Is that complicated business to you? Or just a pretty picture? And to that, they just went silent, like I'd said something obscene. It was clear they were determined to see Vanessa as the ideal child, and no argument would make them think otherwise. To them, she was still their little princess who was trying her best, while I was just a bitter brother who didn't understand their complicated business. In that moment, I realized I'd wasted my time coming here. This was all a lost cause. So I stood up, grabbed my evidence, and left, leaving them to their dream world where Vanessa was flawless. I was furious, disappointed, but at the same time, I felt a surge of resolve. If they wanted to stay blind to her scams, fine, let them. But I wasn't going to sit back. Now I had only one option left, the law, and I wouldn't stop until her little kingdom of lies came crashing down. When I finally filed a fraud report, it felt like I'd just started a machine that couldn't be stopped. A thought kept echoing in my head. Okay, Ethan, you've officially leveled up. The police and financial auditors didn't take long to arrive. They showed up at the company's office early in the morning, clearly there for the long haul, with warrants, stern faces, and stacks of documents heavy enough to make Vanessa's designer desk groan under the weight. When they walked in, Vanessa tried to put on her best shocked expression. "Oh my God, what on earth is happening here?" she said in her usual dramatic tone, as if her favorite handbag had just been thrown in the pool. But her voice cracked, and I noticed it. Yes, little golden girl wasn't feeling so confident anymore. The auditors opened their folders, fired up their laptops, and got to work. Papers, figures, contracts, each little achievement of Vanessa's was scrutinized under a microscope. She tried to brush it off as a misunderstanding, claiming it was just some ridiculous show she didn't need to take seriously. "Are you seriously listening to my brother? He's just jealous of my success," she blurted, as if that should end the whole investigation. But I'd gathered evidence so solid that even the blindest, most biased auditor couldn't overlook it. All her suspicious invoices, money transfers to personal accounts, mysterious contracts, it was all laid out for everyone in the office to see. And as each new fact began closing in on her like a net, her confidence visibly melted away. This time, Vanessa darling, you're not the one calling the shots. As the details began to emerge, the media picked up the story. Fraud in the family business. Brother exposes sister's crimes. The headlines burned bright like flares. In offices, cafes, everywhere, people talked about it as if it were the juiciest series of the year. Vanessa was in the middle of a scandal, and this time her charm couldn't save her. "I trusted you, and this is how you repay us?" Dad shouted, not caring about the reporters nearby. Even Mom looked lost, as if the golden child she'd been so proud of was just an illusion all along. And what did Vanessa do? She denied everything, of course. She played the victim, claiming she was set up. But the truth had a strength her words couldn't match. And if before all I'd felt was resentment and pain, now I felt a powerful sense of justice. When they finally arrested Vanessa, it wasn't just an arrest, it was a full parade. The police arrived at the office that morning, right on time for her regular coffee meetings with her so-called friends and partners. It looked like a scene from a movie. Handcuffs, stern-faced officers, and Vanessa, who for once couldn't keep that "I own this world" look on her face. She tried to keep a trace of her old arrogance, but as they led her through the office, something in her expression shattered. One of her friends looked away, another just gave her a look that said he didn't recognize her anymore. They all started distancing themselves from her as if she had the plague. These business partners, who'd sung her praises a mere few weeks ago, suddenly saw through the act. You know how they say rats are the first to abandon a sinking ship? In her case, the rats didn't even say goodbye. I stood there, watching this spectacular downfall, feeling a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, this was a personal victory. The person who'd gotten everything without lifting a finger, who'd hidden behind a smile and an image of success, was finally facing the consequences. Her world, built on lies and manipulation, was crumbling before her eyes. But as triumphant as I felt, something else hit me. I looked at my parents, and their faces were hollow, as if they were looking at a ghost. Their entire world, their belief in their golden child, was in pieces. Their trust and pride had been shattered into 1,000 fragments. They looked utterly broken, and in that moment, I realized that victory, no matter how sweet, would never be clean. At long last, they started to grasp that Vanessa wasn't the perfect daughter they thought she was. And while I'd anticipated this moment with a certain eagerness, seeing their bitterness and disappointment left me with a heavy feeling. When the company officially came under my management, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter. This time, without Vanessa's shadow looming over everything. The office, once a playground for her ego, was now mine. I was determined to rebuild the business from the ground up, so that its name no longer stirred thoughts of fraud and scandal. My first move was to overhaul the company's internal policies. No more bogus contracts, no more fake accounts. My goal was to make the business transparent, honest, and finally deserving of real respect. And the deeper I dug into it, the stronger I felt. Confidence I hadn't known before. Clients who had left because of Vanessa's brilliant style started coming back, seeing that genuine change was underway. They were no longer sold empty promises wrapped in gold. They got quality and integrity. As for my parents, well, they finally understood that their golden daughter was not only a fraud, but a true threat to the company and their dreams. They came to me, lost and humbled, like I was their last lifeline. "Ethan, you've always been smart. You can make this work," they said, as if they hadn't ignored me for years. But I was no longer the guy seeking their approval. If they wanted my help and support, it would only be on my terms. "Fine, Mom, Dad," I said, looking them straight in the eye. "But now, everything goes my way. No more golden children, no more comparisons. I run this business, and if you want it to succeed, you'll need to trust me completely." They nodded, and for the first time, I saw not only respect, but the realization that their son had grown up long ago. As for Vanessa, her world of deception and manipulation had finally imploded. She was left alone. No friends, no family, no business. The law would handle her, and this time, no smile or charm would save her. She was finally getting what she deserved. Watching all of this unfold, I felt a freedom I'd never known before. No longer needing anyone's approval, no longer bound by others' expectations. Now, I was the one in control of my life.